welcome back, everyone. This is Chase, and joining me today is Al Tabor, a great partner of our program of the Outdoor Recreation Archive here at the university. Gear historian, early member of Mountain Hardwear, Sierra Designs, now a board member at Slingfin. Just all around, you've done so much to help preserve the history of this industry and such an integral part of it. Thanks for joining me to talk a little bit today.
Well, thank you.
Well, I think it's important that we have you on because you were one of the catalysts. Well, you were the catalyst to help get our outdoor recreation archive really off the ground.
Right.
We had talked about how it would be really great if we could preserve these primary sources, these documents from our industry. How do we do that? How do we go about finding these materials? And I mean, through your efforts and your network, the collection really got kickstarted, with over, 1,000 catalogs, 1,200, 1,300 catalogs, really being the foundation of our efforts to preserve the history of the industry. And from that, it's grown to over 2,500 print materials, from over 200 brands. And then we've started doing this oral history project kind of as a part of it, to really complement the materials that are in the archive. To be able to put a voice to those materials has been really important. So it's about time that we got you on to talk a little bit about your place in all of this. So thanks again.
Sure. Happy to be here.
Well,
go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask, do you mind sharing a little bit about, we're going to go back a few years, but do you mind sharing a little bit about, I guess, your introduction to the outdoors? Do you mind sharing some of your background?
So my dad loved the outdoors and spent summers. The Black Hills of South Dakota aren't hills; they're actually mountains. And he would spend summers at a favorite aunt and uncle's at a cabin in a steep canyon in the Black Hills. So we would go out there most years for family vacation, alternating occasionally to the Tetons. He loved camping. My mother, not so much, but got drugged along on all this. And at one point, he became the Boy Scout leader. We had sort of the anarchist Boy Scout troop. So it was family, Boy Scouts. We were the troop that had all different color neckerchiefs. So we're kind of troublemakers. And so I had this love of the outdoors. I would spend time out stomping around as often as I could. Did a lot of backpacking with, honest to God, a sleeping bag with felt and pheasants on the liner, like cloth sleeping bag. If I had to factor in the amount of time I spent backpacking with really crappy gear and the amount of time now I've got wonderful gear, I wish I could kind of reverse what showed up when. One of the things we did in the Boy Scouts is we were reading Kelty catalogs, and we got aluminum conduit and a pipe bender and made ourselves frame packs and attached our cloth Boy Scout packs to those. So, I've had my eye on gear all along. And I ended up in the outdoor industry because I ran out of money in Oakland in 1976 and stumbled into a job. A friend was working for Sierra Designs, throwing boxes around in the warehouse. He wanted to go home for Christmas. He said, I got a friend that needs a job. They said, I don't know if he's capable of throwing boxes around in a warehouse right before Christmas. So I had a job interview. I proved to actually be qualified because I had spent years throwing boxes around in the basement of my dad's drugstore, so I actually had job qualifications. And he never returned, and I had a job. So this is in 76, so I became interested in computers as they appeared. Started doing inventory tracking type stuff on the computer. It's a long story, so I'll give you the punchline. I actually kind of won my career in the outdoor as an IT professional by having a high score on a really early computer game. I would be sitting playing this game as everybody left, so they figured they didn't know there could be computer games. So they figured I was kind of an expert. At one point I inherited a department, and now I'm a computer guy. And I kind of grew up with both, 60s to 70s backpacking business and also the Bay Area, Osborne, K-Pru, Apple IIe, early programming environment. So ultimately, my job was modeling computer systems, information systems, that sort of thing. As 8 of us started Mountain Hardwear. All the computer stuff was my stuff, accounting systems, forecasting systems, and it went from there. So that's both me in the outdoor industry and me in the outdoors.
Yeah. So you started to work for Sierra Designs. What, that was in the 70s, late 70s?
December 1976.
76. Okay. What was kind of the state of the industry at that time? I mean, I think for a lot of people around that time, I think more so now, people see like a career in it. Like you can stay
Right.
in the industry and work in the career for a long time. Did you envision that as, okay, this is a career move? Like I'm
Oh,
working in the outdoor
absolutely not.
industry. But what was the state of things at that time?
Um, a little bit of wild, wild west. I mean, this is North Face, Sierra Designs. It's basically Berkeley hippies, you know. Although somebody once told me I couldn't be a hippie because I had a job, but it was, kind of a motley collection. There were some business people, but more typically was somebody that some long hair that just loved the outdoors. The head of design and sourcing at uh, Mountain Hardwear began because he could work retail 3 days a week and spend 4 days a week in Yosemite.
Hmm.
And so he
Yeah.
just, from becoming the guy that bought the product, sold the product, to the guy that bought the product, to the guy that designed the product. It
Yeah.
was kind of a natural progression, and it was by and large based on people's love of the outdoors and not really a calculated career. A lot of accidental careers.
For a lot
Hap
of
Klopp is
people,
probably one of the few people that kind of had a business vision for it.
well, for a lot of people, it seemed like this was a way to fund the hobby, right?
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely,
Right.
and
You got to
get a
play with the
discount on
gear.
gear.
You got to play with it, and then you got paid, and then you could go spend it all.
Yeah,
Going
and you
out
could
and
get the
playing.
pro use discount, right?
Right.
Everybody, if you're working somewhere, you could get stuff 40% off.
Right. Sure. Well, we could probably have a whole separate episode about this, and I think we talked a little bit about maybe doing this. And Bruce Johnson and I recently talked about the different hubs around the
Hmm.
country, and you were in one of these hubs, right?
Yeah,
California as one of the
right.
hubs of where the industry really took hold. I guess for you, where do you trace some of that back to? What do you trace a lot of that to? Was it one company that you feel like, oh, really took off and that spawned others? Like, where did some of that come
Well,
from,
it
you
has to
feel like?
start with George Rudolph at the ski hut,
Hmm.
and he foots back to the 10th Mountain Division. So coming out of World War II, which is something I learned simply because I started putting together this website. A lot of the sort of founding folks came out of the military, out of World War II, in the Mountain Division, which was, in fact, I have my notes only have thank Gordon Wing for the catalogs and tell 2 stories about George Rudolph. So
And then we can wrap after that, right? We're done,
yeah,
right?
that's a wrap. But so Phil Scott, a good friend of mine, worked, was a climbing buddy of Al Steck's, worked with George Rudolph at Trailwise, and told me, so George Rudolph came back from the war. They actually had a business before the war that would take people up to the Tahoe skiing on the train. So they go up in the morning, come back in the evening. They took a hiatus during the war, and while he was in the military, he and his buddies in the Mountain Corps would actually sneak into Italy, about 10 kilometers to this small village to get Pavetta boots, which were the local craft. And they were so much better than the standard issue that they would go behind enemy lines and get the boots. So immediately after the war, it occurred to him he could import those boots. So he became sort of the sole buyer for these high quality mountaineering boots, and would import them into the United States. When he would visit the village, it would be George Rudolph Day because he was essentially employing, over half the village. And the ski touring, but also the retail store. Trailwise was the manufacturing. Donner Mountain Core was the importer. And the reason it's called Donner Mountain Core is because the Donner Party had to eat their boots
Mm.
before they resorted to eating each other. So it was, some dark humor from, which I think is kind of typical of the mentality then.
It seems
So
on
those are,
brand for the early people in the outdoor industry.
yeah. So those are both stories that I only know because I tricked Phil Scott into letting me record them.
Yeah.
he, he doesn't like to be on camera, but he's a wonderful font of industry information.
So when I guess just kind of being embedded in the hotspot, right? I mean, we're skipping a few years here,
Right.
between Ski Hut and really you coming to that region.
Right.
Was being embedded in that area, did that influence your passion, your interest in the history of the industry?
Um, well, okay. So yes and no. And here's how the website came along. Well, okay, first, one short connector. So the founders of the North Face, founders of Sierra Designs, all these folks worked for George Rudolph before they went off to start those other businesses.
Yeah.
So it's not just he was there first. He was, it's a lineage,
Mm-hmm.
not just a co-location. So my fascination is with stories. um, why you remember a particular story, why you tell a particular story, how the stories you tell define you as a human being, how the stories we tell define us as a people, how the stories we might tell as an industry define us as an industry that contains both the information but also the shared experience. And if it occurred to me, okay, well, we've got Twitter, Facebook. Twitter's kind of like a nod, 140 characters. Facebook's showing somebody pictures of your kids or whatever when you meet on the street, which are both legitimate forms of conversation. But if we're going to have a deep conversation, either because we're old friends and we reconnect, or we bump into each other and hit it off, we end up trading stories. It communicates our experience. It looks for shared experience, a whole variety of things. So it occurred to me, well, can I build a social media based around stories? And well, I knew a lot of people that had been telling stories on each other for decades, all the folks in the outdoor industry. A lot of them are sales reps or people like Bob Woodward, we were talking about, that are great storytellers. George Marks, the founder, one of the two founders of Sierra Designs, three founders, is kind of a natural raconteur. So I thought, well, all I got to do is grab these guys and start them telling stories. And my idea was, okay, I got my story of the outdoor industry the way we started. You have said, what's your story? How'd you get into it? Well, pretty much everybody, Mountain Hardwear was the sum total of all those stories. Everybody's first day, everybody's career, everybody's involvement. And particularly in an industry in which people are emotionally involved in what they do. They're not waiting for 5 o'clock. Well, they are waiting for 5 o'clock because they could go outdoors, right? Or they showed up late because they went surfing. So it kind of captures the emotion. And so my initial mission was, I'm just going to get everybody's first day from Mountain Hardwear. And the way I did it is I got together the founders of Mountain Hardwear and we interviewed each other. So, and that's a great story. We were trying to buy Sierra Designs out of bankruptcy court. The North Face, Marmot, Sierra Designs were all owned by this company called Odyssey that exploded into bankruptcy in Hong Kong. And if that happens, then there are warrants out for the arrests of, so people escaped Hong Kong at one jump ahead of the law, not our people. But so we were trying to buy ourselves from the guys that sort of owned the North Face during sort of perhaps it's the darkest section of its history. And they didn't want to sell us to ourselves because we would be competition for what they wanted to do at the North Face. So we made an offer, they ignored us. We made an offer, they ignored us. Well, our fearless leader is this guy, Jack Gilbert, who must be on your list of people to talk to. He's 6 foot, I don't know, 6, whatever. It's Halloween. He's got a Stetson hat on, a big belt, cowboy, right? And we've been conspiring in the Mexican restaurant across the street. They had an upstairs banquet room, and we go over there and say, okay, how are we going to get Sierra Designs? And realized we aren't going to get it. But our financial guy, Ian Cummings, said, well, why don't you just start your own? And we said, we could do that. So Jack walks in and says, well, I'd like to discuss this. Here's an offer. We've been making offers. I said, which I always say, we got to do blah, blah, blah. He said, okay, well, I quit. And gave him an envelope. Paul Kramer, who was the head of design and sourcing, was in Hong Kong designing the Sierra Designs line. So he gave him an envelope, and they opened it, and Paul had quit. And they said, well, is there going to be anybody else? And they said, well, you might want to go over there and see. So, 6 more of us quit on Halloween, in a blaze of glory. 5 hours later, I'm sitting in the bar of this Mexican restaurant, looking out the window while they're changing the locks on my former place of employment. It was a Friday. Monday morning, we drove to Office Depot and bought cafeteria tables and staplers. And we were in competition with our former self. So a great story, right? And everybody had their own take on how they felt about it. Were you freaked out because you're about to quit your job and launch yourself into the unknown? So I had everybody talk to each other, and then I set about trying to get everybody's first day story. People that started in week 2, people that started in year 5. I just, what I discovered is it's not easy to create a social media based around stories, but I got a lot of great stories. So at one point I just kind of embraced it and said, well, I'm extruding an oral history of the outdoor industry. George Marks reads this thing and starts sending me material. I noticed Bob Woodward's thing isn't really published anywhere, so I approached Bob about it. One of the great joys of this is people come out of the woodwork and say, hey, I read a story about my mom that used to sew, at Mountain or at Sierra Designs. And, that story where they talk about her daughter, that's me. So, or do you know where George Marks is now? Can I get his email address? So it's, so I still sort of ride on the connective tissue, but Bruce Johnson is the historian. I'm just a guy that accidentally built a site with a lot of oral history on it.
Well, I'd have to challenge that too. I mean, I see you both as historians, but maybe we can go back a little bit and dive more into the founding of Mountain Hardwear. And what were some of your thoughts, going into that and starting a company?
Well, I was not one of the people that had any sort of misgivings. I knew Jack Gilbert. I knew Paul Kramer. There was just no choice as far as I was concerned. And I've worked for a variety of people. Jack Gilbert is like the master of Zen management. He hires the right people, tries to get out of the way. He provides a clear vision, not a lot of babysitting. So we had a working relationship with each other already. So do I trust these people, or do I trust this dubious, other group of people that seem to be now controlling the process? Is just no doubt which way to go.
What year was this?
Oh, where are we? 93?
93.
93. So it'd be Halloween in 93. I may be off a year. Could be 92. As you get old, it's all the past, right? But
what was that experience like for you building a company? And I know, and your role within that. Can you share a little bit more? You've alluded to it before, but what was your part in all the founding of Mountain Hardwear?
Well, okay. So to start out, there were 6 of us, and then shortly thereafter, there were 8. So you get a sixth of the pie.
Mm-hmm.
So Roberta, for example, was customer service and human resources. I was computers, which meant computers or anything that happened on computers.
Yeah.
Accounting system happens on computers. Financial modeling happens on computers. Fixing the printer happens on computers. So the first thing I did is figured out how to do barcode labels with a $300 printer and hook up an old bulletin board system. to get us all email, And what I discovered is tech is a wonderful job because you have to relearn it every 3 years. So you got to keep growing. It's like it's shark, you swim or you drown. So, um, which may sound a little scary, but it wasn't. It was continually stimulating. And over time, what I myself did narrowed to primarily supply chain stuff. A lot of figuring out because it's a capital intensive business and there's a lot of business that hits around Christmas. So about once a year, we'd have to bet our entire existence on the right buy. And I was the guy that put together the information and the team and the intersection between all those pieces to figure out what we should buy, and then work with the sourcing folks to take the money we had and do it in a rational manner. So eventually I became a demand planner, but I continued in this backdrop. So I was information systems. And we were all directors of something. So I'm director of information systems and I've got nobody working for me. So and I was also operations, which is the warehouse, you know. So it's like, okay, get to work, It's like,
Yeah.
nobody to boss around. And we had working relationships. And we also had an ethic of you don't blame people, you fix it going forward. So I've been places that, you've got a 20% cover your ass overhead where everybody spends half their time proving their innocence. So at their eventual trial, they can drag this out of the file cabinet, which is ridiculous. One of our rituals is when you got hired, you had to build a desk. You had to find materials, figure out where you were going to be, and construct your desk. It sort of just kicked things off on the right foot. The downside is if you needed support and didn't know how to ask for it, we were going to discover that when your body started to smell, right? I mean, there was like zero babysitting. So it was a wonderful place to work,
Yeah. What was, I guess maybe, can you share a little bit of the trajectory of the company over the next few years and maybe some of the milestones and highs and lows
Well,
and
yeah. There weren't a lot of lows. Um, the, we had, so we had sort of a line design. The first thing we did is just try to get some local contractors building bags and some fleece pieces so we could get a little bit of cash flow going. So we had sort of a crippled line for the first fall. Spring, we had a line, tents and bags. If you have the tent designs pretty roughed out, bags are not as challenging. So the first big objective was to get some of that set and then get a clothing line going. One of the lows was when our first big shipment of high dollar Gore-Tex came in. All the hood hardware, strap, clip, whatever, was broken. It just would pull out. So everybody in the CEO, everybody had these coats spread out over their desk that they were testing. And if they could do a repair, great. Otherwise, it was going into a pile for somebody else to repair. So that was like the most expensive piece in our in the biggest chunk of cash in our first fall presentation. Another low was duking it out with Montbell over what we thought was intellectual property we owned and he thought was intellectual property he owned. Everybody complimented us on picking the worst lawyer possible, which might have determined the outcome. But we grew steadily. We got our foot in the door because everybody knew Jack and Paul, and then managed to deliver the good stuff. And we defined ourselves explicitly as we wanted to be, authentic, top quality Berkeley backpacking business. The last honest backpacking business in Berkeley. And at one point, we forced Jack to let us create a mission statement, which I still remember because it's so simple. It's make the best stuff, be the easiest company to work with, make some money, and have fun. You could always tell if you were doing that, unlike some more vague, am I having fun at the very least? And, is it contributing to some of these other objectives? So it was a loose structure, but a pretty clean vision. And and we just, it was an upward trajectory from there on in.
I think I love those the mission of the company, right? Those objectives. Like you're right, those are a lot easier to measure than most company slogans or objectives or mission statements.
Yeah,
I
and
love
none of
that.
us were there to be miserable. I mean,
Right.
if we're not doing it in a way that we find enjoyable, we need to change what we're doing. So that was a serious component.
Right. It seems like, and that at that point in time too, the 90s was probably an interesting time for the outdoor industry. I mean, just a lot of change, I imagine.
Yeah, yep.
Um, and even more, after that, I've just, from a technological standpoint, I feel like, I mean, brands being acquired,
Hmm.
just, I mean, the
Right,
origin of the company being kind of failed corporate consolidation.
right.
Um, what was kind of the lay of the land during that time, kind of the 90s era of the outdoors, and you guys coming up in that, and did that provide an opportunity to, for Mountain Hardwear to succeed?
Yeah, I mean, it's not the friendliest way to look at it because we're sort of an industry that um, prides ourselves on competing during the day, but being able to hang out together in the bars at night.
Hmm.
Um, but the metaphor for me was, and I'm not sure it's true, but what I've heard is that the way a python kills something is every time it exhales, it just takes in the slack until it, you know, can't can't breathe. Well, we weren't out there rooting for anybody to stumble, but you got to deliver the high quality stuff, and then whenever you see an opportunity, be ready to move. If somebody leaves a quarter on the table, you take the quarter. So there's definitely a business thing going on, uh, and I think having a lot of small and medium players is great for the business because there's a lot of innovation there, and people are challenging each other, to do a better sleeping bag, do a better tent, um, and it's not like people from all over are rushing to create a tent company or a bag company. It's not people that are just looking for dollars aren't showing up. Um, it's people that are want to have a better sleeping bag and want to spend as much time outdoors as possible and figure out a way to keep body and soul together while they're doing it. So
Right. So how long were you with the company?
I was so we started in, say, 93. 20 years later, we sold to Columbia. I was there probably another almost a decade. Not quite. I think I retired in like 2008.
Right.
I
Right.
phased out. I went from 5 days to 4 days to 3 days to gone.
Right. And during that time, so when did you start to create the Out and Under, your project to document the history of the
That was a
founding of the company?
post-retirement, so that was kind of a
Okay.
retirement project.
Yeah.
Um, I went through mentally a bunch of options. I actually, being a computer guy, I kind of reverse engineered my life uh, to think about what I enjoyed and why, and then how could I do things um, that met those criteria that had provided satisfaction earlier. And quite frankly, I loved working at Mountain Hardwear, but even things I love doing, I don't love doing 50 hours a week. So
Right.
retirement was basically getting let off the leash. No downside.
Right. And so did that, and you kind of channeled some of that, not obviously not your whole life, but channeled a lot of that energy into this effort to, help preserve, document, tell stories about the outdoor industry.
Yeah, and it was a natural because I had to learn a whole new set of technologies, which is what I've been doing my entire career. I love stories. I love the people. Um, it built under its own momentum. So um, yeah. So and ultimately, what I found out works the best, and it might work for your podcast, is the main hurdle I hit trying to get people to record their stories is not everybody's a great storyteller just sitting in a room by themselves. There's your Bob Woodwards that can sit there and type up a good story. What works better is if you and I are talking. You can see if I don't understand, I can see your response. Works great. We take turns. If I stick a mic in your face, chances are you're now editing.
Yep.
your thing. So most people. So I would say, oh, that's a great story. Tell that story again. And they're like, so now we got a double tick.
Yeah.
Oh, if that works, if I'm interviewing you, because I can edit that out a little bit. And video's even worse, right? You know, because you start cutting out the verbal ticks. People are jumping from spot to spot. You need a B-roll. Um, so my vision for moving this natural dynamic of storytelling online, pass one failed. Pass two is works better, but it so what ultimately works the best is if I get three people that work together or shared some component of the outdoor industry together. Hopefully all are commenting on the event or how they became involved to start with and said, okay, tell the story. Then, and just stick a mic in the middle. They forget that there's a mic in the middle.
Right.
And
Yeah. It just becomes much more
they,
of a conversation.
it becomes a conversation and I can edit it up uh, into chunks. I get everything transcribed so that search engines can find it. And put it on the website. And so I think what it would take to have that sort of story website going is it's like there's the great aunt in every family that knows where everybody is. So if you have a reunion, they can find each other and keeps people. You need a facilitator. So I still think the vision is good, but the path to get there is much more complex than I originally assumed.
Right. How do you feel like the industry does it at preserving its own history and telling its story?
If okay, so uh, Patagonia's got a lot of history, and they've got a historian. There's been no disruption in the continuity of ownership at Patagonia.
Hmm.
The Anybody that I saved all the catalogs at Mountain Hardwear. I had a room, I had everything slotted up because I valued our history. Well, somebody new comes in, they don't, the history is a different thing. It's something they bought. They bought a brand. Does this help me make money? Does it help the brand? So a lot of it kind of sucks, frankly. The catalogs I got were because a guy, Gordon Wing, who worked at retail at Marmot in Berkeley, saved catalogs. Saved, I don't know how many boxes we sent you, 25, a lot,
Yeah.
right? And I had some catalogs online, so he contacted me and said, "Do you want these catalogs?" And I said, "I guess, yeah." And I had a partner, this guy named Dan Grassetti, that was as a high school kid, had worked at Trailwise, who was trying to chase down old Trailwise catalogs. So he was kind of my partner in this. So he helped me get them, and then we were sitting there looking at all these catalogs, and we said, "These really belong, in a public institution. They belong in a library." And so we immediately thought of you all because we knew you had the program, and that sort of kicked it off. Uh, so I think the history has only been preserved accidentally
Right.
by everybody. It's accidentally in my case by everybody but Bruce.
Yeah. Yeah. Bruce
Right?
has done it with intention for,
Bruce.
I mean,
Bruce is the guy
since the
with
'90s.
intention. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And I
all
think
all
and I
kudos
think
to Bruce.
I think it takes all of us, right? It takes people like you who are vigilant and like trying to, seize the as opportunities. Oh, there's these catalogs, like let's refer them or put these catalogs in a place where they'll be preserved. Like, the university is an essential part of this. Like we need universities, public
Right.
institutions that can preserve and make sure that these things are available. They're not going to be behind a locked door where no one can appreciate them. You need Bruce Johnsons who come at it from that historian approach, and are out there telling the stories. You need people like Dr. Rachel Gross, right, who
Right.
comes from the academic perspective and can look at our industry within the larger context. And then you
Right.
need the brands, right, who have bought in and like feel passionate about preserving their own history. So it seems like you kind of um, need a few different people and companies to buy into this idea, and they all support each other in a way.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
So I want to kind of go back a little bit. Like I said, really bringing these catalogs to us kicked off this whole history initiative. Do you and you kind of outlined kind of how that all came about. But I just wanted to emphasize that piece. I mean, to be able to send us, I don't remember how many boxes it was either, but 1,200 or 1,300 catalogs to give this collection a foundation. I mean, I don't know how else we would have done it. Because outside of that, if you have one or two catalogs, that's not a collection, right?
Right.
But people will look at a catalog and say, oh, that's cool. But if you look at an entire collection of Chenard catalogs next to each other,
Right.
right, or Sierra Designs catalogs all in a row, for some reason the quantity makes it more impactful to the
Right.
eye. Like, it just seems like, oh, this is a collection. It gives
Yeah.
it more
And
legitimacy. And so
absolutely.
that was really significant to be able to have. I mean, when you talk 100, a couple hundred, yeah, that's cool. But you could say we've got 1,000.
Right.
For some reason in people's minds, that's like, wow, that's a substantial collection. Um, so I just wanted to emphasize that again, like how significant that was, and appreciate you being on the lookout for us.
Yeah, and the outdoor industry certainly is embedded in a culture. So you can see the sort of artsy catalogs from the 60s. You can see um, where it kind of went pro. Suddenly it's a professional photographer. They're more concerned about featuring the product. There's the really embarrassing late 70s where stuff looks kind of disco.
I love those ones.
You get,
Yeah.
yeah, the haircuts and some of the colors. So just as and the Berkeley and all the sites, Boulder, Berkeley, whatever, it really was emerged out of a time where people were thinking about back to the land, the whole Stewart brand, the whole Earth Review. Jay Baldwin, who was a whole earther, was also a tent designer. Um, so it's the inspiration of Buckminster Fuller, who was not the venerable double godfather at that point. He was like the weirdo designer. So that attracted some. Bruce Hamilton at the North Face was a big Bucky Fuller fan, and that's how he ended up affiliated with the North Face. And so that interpenetration between all the thinking that was emerging at that period of time, layered on top of that core throughout, from World War II vets to Berkeley hippies, to the folks in the 90s, to the ultralight Cuban fiber folks now. There's that thread, but then there's the different waves of culture, and because it's sort of close to the ground, a lot of the marketing is not marketing analysis. It's somebody that does the sport talking about what they do. It really reflects a lot of that variance and continuity through the culture over the last, I don't know, 60 years.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really powerful. This whole theme, kind of this conversation, has really been about story and telling stories, um, and there's been a few people, yourself included, who have been out there trying to tie it all together, right, and create a story. And I think that, I don't know, when you feel like you're a part of a story, I don't know, you get different outcomes, right? And I think
Right.
for a lot of my thought process behind a lot of this collecting has been, I want students in our product design program to feel a part of something bigger, right? And feel like they're
Right.
part of something that has a heritage. And I think your mindset changes. You treat it that differently. Maybe there's a responsibility that comes with that. But
That's
um,
interesting.
and to a degree, if and we've talked about this a few times on kind of this history series that we've been doing, but for some people, especially founders in the outdoor industry, they don't necessarily think that what they're doing is significant, right? Um, but I
Hmm.
think I've found that if people, because a lot of them think, oh, this industry is new, right? It's we're just doing what we do. But when we've put the outdoor industry kind of in a longer context, like, oh no, this outdoor industry has been around a lot longer than the 60s.
Right.
It was before Jerry in the 40s and 50s. You can trace it back to earlier than Abercrombie and Fitch in 1909, right? Like,
Right.
it goes back even further than that. And when you start to spread it out and see the outdoor industry as something that spans 150 years versus 50
Right.
years,
Right.
I think your mindset changes a little bit when you see yourself in this larger the larger timeline of the industry.
Yeah, the larger timeline, and I think the current context, or I don't think it's just new, but um, the thing that determines whether any natural environment does well is the relation of people to it. If they view it as something to pave over or exploit or whatever, it decays. So helping people have a high quality experience of wilderness, or even the local park, they're wearing the coat and bopping around town, is that connection with the outdoors, I think, is critical to our survival as a species at this point.
Hmm.
And I think we need the wilderness, and I think the wilderness needs us, and we're in an industry that can help facilitate that connection with the wild, natural world. I think it's kind of a trust. So I was pretty cynical when I started. It's like, well, the products we're making here aren't hurting anybody, so it's probably okay. And then over time, I became more sort of a evangelist for the whole enterprise.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think it takes people like you, creating that story and tying things together, and more I've realized, especially with some of the work of like a Bruce Johnson, or in the case of your Bob Woodward, republishing some of his work. Um, if that material isn't discoverable,
Right.
it's almost as if it doesn't exist, right? And
Yeah.
you have an appreciation for this, right? It being more in the
Yeah.
tech space. If it's not searchable, if people can't find it, then
Right.
that story can't be told and it can't continue. It breaks, right? The link breaks.
Right.
Literally, right? in
Right.
in ways. And so it kind of hits home that importance of telling these stories, putting them in a form where they're accessible, where people can appreciate them,
Right.
taking the work of like a Bruce Johnson and doing oral histories, where we dive
Right.
into each
Right.
brand, because people are listening to things, people are watching things, people aren't
Right.
reading as much. But maybe they'll watch one of these conversations and it'll spark something, and then they'll go back and dive into the
Right.
print materials or the website. So it's just hit home to me more and more the importance of taking these stories and putting them in a form that people can access them. One that maybe you'll have some insights on that's been interesting is I've been going through the Summit magazine catalogs that we just recently acquired from the Crenshaw family. And I flip through the ads in the back because they're just a perfect encapsulation of the brands that were around at that
Hmm.
time, or at least the
Right.
ones that paid for an ad spot, right?
Right.
And some of the ones between 55 and 65, most of them, there's a record of them online, like Holy Bar, Jerry.
Right.
You can find information about these companies largely because of people like Bruce, right?
Right.
That
Yeah.
who has put it online. But
Right.
there's a couple in there, Bud Davis packs.
Hmm.
I search online
Right.
and I can't find any information about them. And I talk to someone like Bruce, someone who's so plugged into the industry, and he says, I've never heard of them. I don't
Right.
know where they came from. And you type it in online, nothing comes up, right? And
Right.
that's really because, I mean, there's probably people who know something about that
Right.
company,
Right.
but they never wrote it down online,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So again, like that history just is erased if it's not converted into a form where people can use it.
Yep.
Which maybe you have some insights on that company. I can't find anyone who knows
No,
anything
I'm
about it.
I'm I have nothing.
Yeah. So I mean, they took out ad spots in Summit Magazine right next to Holy Bar and Jerry from 55 to 65, and they were in Washington, Seattle. That's about all I know. So
Huh.
it's kind of interesting. So
Maybe a Bud Davis person will listen to this podcast and get in contact with you.
yeah. See, that's the thing, right? It's like we've got to put it out there, and like you said, people come out of the woodwork. And I think people are hungry for this kind of information, and they want to know, especially people in our industry. I feel like they want authenticity. They want
Hmm.
to know where something came from, like whether it's the material. They want to know how it's made. They want to know where it was
Right.
sourced. They want to know who sewed it, how they were treated. I think the same can be said of the history. It's like we want
Yeah.
to know where this company came from, what values they espouse. So I think people are hungry and are looking for this kind of information. So you've done such a huge service for people to be able to go back and hear these stories, read these stories of people in the industry. But
Well, thanks.
what's the next phase of Out and Under? and your work telling these stories?
Uh, well, um, I've sort of been distracted lately. Politics has a lot to do with it. The I kind of want to do a reboot of the story project that isn't outdoor industry, and
Mm,
definitely want to. I think everybody told me a story. I'm kind of holding trust, so I got to keep that moving forward. If somebody wants to become my partner on this, boy, I've got a spot for you, because the whole thing of, okay, let's line up three people, let's get them talking to each other, let's get it out to get transcribed, let's get on the video editor and chop it up into pieces is pretty labor intensive.
it is, yeah.
So, um, so I'm going to keep the flame burning, but I'm not necessarily feeding it. I'm not trying to grow it. It's particularly fast at the moment, and that could change. I didn't think 3 years ago I'd be doing what I'm doing right now most of the time. So
Right. Yeah. So who knows?
who
Who
knows?
knows what the future holds?
It's not. I can promise you, it's not going to go away. Will it?
Right.
The rate at which it will grow, anybody's guess.
Well, I'm glad that it's still there. I refer to it, I mean, anytime like I interview someone, I refer to the stories that are on there. I go on there quite a bit just to learn myself. I'm relatively new. I mean, in the larger industry, and I want to acquaint myself with this industry and to be better informed and ask better questions when I am talking to
Hmm.
people. But um, so I use it all the time. So I'm glad it's going to still be there.
Well, great. I'm
Do you
I'm really glad to hear that.
Yeah. Do you want to share a little bit about kind of some of the other things that you're working on? You mentioned that I mean, you're still involved in the industry, working with
Right.
Slingfin. Do you mind sharing a little bit about, some of the other projects, other responsibilities that you have?
Well, Slingfin is Martin Zamitis, the tent designer, is my favorite guy from all the years, and because I love tents, I love Martin, it's so working with them is has been fun. My job is I nag because there's only three of them, and if they nag each other, it would get a little toxic. But I can show up once a week. Formally, it's now Zoom, but we would go out to lunch and go through the list, and I'd nag. The weirdest thing I'm involved in is offered to help a buddy on a website, and now I am being introduced as the CFO of a project that's attempting to build a solar farm, training campus, and EV charging station in Union Springs, Alabama,
Wow.
which I've never been. I think I was in DC once. This is not my part of the country.
Well,
So
speaking of not knowing what you're going to do in 3 years, right? I
yeah,
mean, didn't see that one coming.
I did not see that one coming. But and I've been writing a lot, which is kind of I retired to write a lot and discovered, well, I really need to do some engineering too, because you know, I thought I knew what would make me happy in any particular niche, but unless I'm building websites or writing code a little bit, so I do a little bit of that. I'm writing on Medium, helping friends with websites, variety of things.
Staying busy, retirement. You don't stop, even in
Let off the
retirement.
leash. You're just off the leash.
You don't sound retired.
I'm never going to end up on the beach, with a metal detector, looking for spare coins. It's just, I think I was bored in high school in a couple of classes. I haven't been bored since. So,
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, how can people stay in touch with you?
altabor.org
Okay,
is,
great.
I try to keep a summary of what I'm doing there.
Perfect. So that's the best place, and then you can go to all your different projects that you're working on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great.
So if you're
Perfect.
outdoor industry, the thing I added to just flat storytelling, I transcribed them, but I would also tag things. So the people, the organizations, some events. If you're interested in a particular company, the best thing to do is go there, find a story about that, click the link on the side that takes you to all the stories about that company. So it does have some metadata if you're a IT guy, designed to help, a little bit of tagging it to help people chase threads down. And I also put and I should update it, but I put Bruce's entire site index in there as well. So inevitably, one of those tags off the site takes you to an index of Bruce's site, and you can foot into his more systematic exploration of the companies and the people.
Right. Oh, that's great. Okay, perfect. And that's altabor.org.
Yep, Tabor.
Okay, great. Perfect. Well, Al, thanks so much. Especially everything that you've done to help the archive. Just all your thoughts back and forth. I know I send you quite a few emails, especially recently.
Right.
But appreciate all your help and being willing to tell your story here today.
Right. Well, it was fun.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure we could talk a lot more. And I want to brainstorm some other topics with you sometime. But I think just even talking about the history of the region would be really
Right.
interesting. I mean, even I think you mentioned this, right? Kind of the rise of the outdoor industry and tech, kind of in that
Right.
same region, and
Right.
the parallels there. I think there's a lot more to talk about. So we'll have to do
Right.
a part 2 and part 3, maybe.
Okay. Wonderful.
Okay, sounds
Okay.
good. Well, thanks
Yep.
as always, Al. Good to see
Good
you.
talking to you.